Hey everyone, welcome back. We're doing cardio part 2. If you haven't heard our first cardio podcast, which was the last podcast, cardio part 1, we talked about what is cardio, heart rate variability, a little bit of the science of it. We're going to hit more of the science. There's a couple of things that we listen that we want to clarify and elaborate on, lung function, different things around VO2 max. As a reminder, our new, we're calling it a nutrition bar, and the only reason is because it's a little less calories, a little lighter, coming out in a couple weeks. If you haven't listened to the last couple podcasts, we've been focusing on exercise. We talked about periodization. We talked about our 89-day training plan, which both my dad and myself are participating in right now as a refocus, reprioritization. And we're back in stock with all of our products. Happy to help if anyone has any questions. And share the podcast if you like it. It helps us get some more information to the world. And one other call out is we like to do this video podcast. And if you haven't watched it, you just listen to it. I think the video podcast is interesting because you can see us talking about it. Gives you a little body language. But again, you're up at the cottage, coming remote via video, and we're going to continue this conversation around cardio. And you wanted to focus in on lung function. We didn't have a lot of time to talk about lung function, so let's start right there. What is lung function? Why is it important to cardio?
Well, again, the whole thing we talked about cardio is as we age, the thing that ages fastest on every human being is the ability of the lungs. It's called lung function. Tidal volume, there's a more detail to it. But really, as we age, that's the thing we lose. And then we lose nerve conduction, mobility, flexibility, strength. We lose that. But back to the cardiovascular, why we're talking about today is because you want to maintain this high level. And max VO2, the amount of volume your body can produce with your body with oxygen, maximum workload, is one of the greatest predictors of how long you're going to live. So when we think about lung function, we want to really be able to, back to what we've taught many times, breathing more through your nose, using your diaphragm or your belly, and then slowing it down. And a great indicator of your cardiovascular health is the amount of breaths you take per minute. And the average person in the United States today breathes on average, this is crazy number, between 18 and 20 breaths per minute. In reality, if you're healthy, you're going to probably breathe anywhere between 10 and 14 breaths per minute. And that over a period of time puts a lot of stress on the cardiovascular system if you're breathing that often. So that's why the lung function, why back to cardiovascular health. We talked about stroke volume last time. We talked about cardiac output, ejection fraction. These all tie together. But again, go back to the simplicity. Breathe through your nose as much as you can. Start using your diaphragm versus your chest and slow down your breathing. And if you can do that, again, that's a great thing you can do as you age.
So we're 3 minutes into the podcast and we've already used ejection fraction again. It's such a fun thing when we get your exercise physiology back dusted off. Why does breath, how many breaths you take per minute, mean what your lung function or cardiovascular fitness is? And why isn't that talked about more?
Well, we're talking mostly about the heart today and cardiovascular, but cardiovascular, when I think of cardiovascular health, I think of the whole system. That's your heart, that's your lungs, that's your nervous system, that's your vessels. It's really everything working in as an orchestra. And so when you think about the heart itself, heart rate, we talked about this last time, heart rate's a great indicator of your overall health, your resting heart rate. I believe most people in the United States should have a resting heart rate of under 65, more closer to 55. And the average resting heart rate in the United States is closer to 75. So when resting heart rate goes up, when you think about cardiac output, the ability to do any work is heart rate times stroke volume. And last time we talked about stroke volume is the ability for the heart to contract. The stronger the stroke volume, the lower the resting heart rate. So that's why resting heart rate is such a big deal. So, okay, so now what's the ejection fraction? Ejection fraction means if you had a balloon full of blood and you squeeze all the blood out of that balloon, you would have 100% ejection fraction. But most people, as they age, they don't have enough strength, the stroke volume, so their ejection fraction goes down. This all works together. So when you think about breathing itself, if I'm breathing less breaths per minute, that means that cardiovascular system is a fine-tuned machine. If I'm constantly breathing, I already know I don't have a good stroke volume, probably have a high resting heart rate variability is high, all the things that go with that. So again, they're all connected. So if somebody comes to see me and they have a low, go ahead.
Here's the thing that I think would matter to the listener. So why do you breathe more if you have a lower cardiac output and maybe a higher resting heart rate? Why are you breathing more? What's the body trying to get?
It's not having enough ability to get enough oxygen and get rid of carbon dioxide. That's the key. We can't get rid of it and we can't get it. So we have to breathe more versus less. So when I bring in somebody and the first thing I measure is their ability to see how many breaths they take per minute, they just don't quite understand. And then I have them blow up a balloon. And the balloon shows me their ability of their lung function. They don't have the ability to blow up the balloon. They don't have that strength of that diaphragm. Hence, they're going to have breathe all the time because they can't get that thing. So instead of doing a fancy spirometer that you would do at maybe the hospital, I just have them blow up a balloon and they're like shocked. Now I got their attention. Like, wow, this matters. I go, yeah, it matters a lot because you don't have the ability, the strength of the diaphragm to get oxygen in and dioxide out, carbon dioxide out. And if you can't do that, then we're slowly, what we talked about last time, you start losing your capacity. And that's why VO2 max is such a great indicator of how you're going to age.
Okay, now let's connect one more dot. So we're breathing more, putting more pressure. The heart is working harder. We're not getting enough oxygen. We're not eliminating. And then why does that start to connect to our nervous system?
Well, we talked a little bit about heart rate variability last time, and that's directly related to nervous system. So when we're overstressed, the sympathetic nervous system, which is the gas pedal, is on. Everything goes up. Heart rate goes up. Blood pressure goes up. Pupils dilate. Muscles contract. That's getting us ready to the fight or flight. The other side of the equation is called the parasympathetic. That's rest and digest. So when I'm doing slow, nasal, diaphragmatic breaths, I stimulate that parasympathetic nervous system that slows everything down and basically slows down that sympathetic nervous system. And so that's why the nervous system is so critical. So when you look at heart rate variability, that's why they're using it in all these athletes, is because they can get an indication of that maybe today I don't really want to push it because my sympathetic nervous system is a little bit more stimulated. I didn't get enough sleep, didn't get enough rest. And so a lot of my clients, they want to get these good workouts, but reality is many times I want them to actually slow down so they can use the system they're supposed to be using. So right now in our world, we're way too much. We talked about yin and yang, too much yang, too much sympathetic, going too fast, not getting enough recovery.
Yeah, and something I learned probably a handful of years ago that I didn't know is, so when you consciously change how you breathe, you can start to activate the vagus nerve to relax the body to go into parasympathetic. But what I didn't know is the opposite, and there's always a cause and effect and an opposite, is that if you are breathing incorrectly or more inefficiently, or you're putting more pressure on the heart using the chest, we have this reflex called the Herring-Brewer reflex. And so the Herring-Brewer reflex, how it works is if you start to become a dominant chest breather, you have these sensory neurons that are going to activate the sympathetic nervous system automatically. And so it's not even that we maybe have a threat. It's not even maybe that we are feeling like we're stressed, but the body's nervous system goes into this sympathetic, whether you know it or not, based on how you breathe. And so, breathing, lung function, cardiovascular fitness, mental health, it all ties and wraps around. And in some cases, we meet people that overtrain, are very cardiovascular fit, but they have a ton of stress and they're anxious. And then we meet probably the majority of people are less cardiovascular fit. They don't breathe correctly, and they're in this state of, I would say, fight or flight, and they don't really need to be. So that's how they're all interconnected. And I think it's a great way to launch part two here.
Well, and again, now now I'm putting too much caffeine in my body, and I'm consuming an energy drink and the White Claws of the world, and no, it's doing with the opposite of what people want to do. So that you're exactly right. They're not even aware of it, and that's why if you just said one thing today, I'm going to do the big three. How many breaths do you take per minute? What's my resting heart rate? What's my blood pressure? If you know those numbers, that's a great step. But I got to tell you, and you know this, that 99% of people coming to see us individually don't know those three numbers. They might know their blood pressure if it's too high, but they don't really know it. And they don't know how many breaths they take per minute. And most people, unless they're using some wearable, don't really know what their resting heart rate is.
Yeah, so there's a challenge to every listener is send us an email, info@OnTargetLiving. Once you find what your breaths per minute are, it's a very good self-awareness tool. And I'm constantly doing it. So as we get now into the how to do it, and we'll talk about a couple of things, but I pulled up this stat before we started, and it's predicted by 2050 that 61% of US adults will have some type of cardiovascular disease. This could be heart rate, this could be blood pressure, this could be atrial fibrillation or arrhythmia. Stroke is going to be the highest of the growth factors in this area. And what we're seeing, and this is really interesting, we won't go into this too deep, but there's been a decrease in diagnosis of high cholesterol. And we've been talking for years that cardiovascular risk is not directly related to cholesterol numbers. But it's interesting, 61% of US adults are going to have some cardiovascular disease by 2050. And I think sometimes our message can come across, people spend too much time from an exercise standpoint focused on cardio. I do think that can be a challenge. But also in the bigger picture, the 30,000-foot view, I think most people are not aware of their cardiovascular fitness or preventative measures or opportunities that they have. And I think this is leading us to the path that we're going, where more than half the population of adults are going to have some issues with cardiovascular disease. And you see it every day with specifically people your age with atrial fibrillation. I've never seen something become so popular and known in such a short period of time. I'm sure when you went through school, you heard of atrial fibrillation and arrhythmias and different types of factors, but now it's like common if you're above the age of 50 to have a conversation that I have AFib. And so why is this going in this direction, and what can we actually do? And that's the goal of the remainder of the podcast, is to give people actual tangible actions to do.
Well, I think step one is we always talk about self-awareness. That's what you're talking about right now. So self-awareness, what is your resting heart rate? What is your blood pressure? How many breaths do you take per minute? How many hours of sleep do you get? What kind of cardio do you do? Do you walk? Do you jog, mini trampoline, whatever? But it creates that self-awareness. So if I'm coming on somebody, many people that are high level of cardiovascular exercise, the reason they're getting AFib is many times they're dehydrated. They're overtraining. And so you got to step back. What's causing atrial fibrillation? So if you look at the four chambers of the heart, you have the ventricles and you have the atrial, and that's where your SA node, which starts to beat naturally, starts to decide, well, I'm going to beat a little bit more often And so that's where AFib comes in, which, as you said, is very common. It's not normal. So if you have AFib out there, there's many things. You might be deficient in magnesium. You're probably dehydrated. You're probably overtraining, probably undertraining, whatever it is, but the body's out of balance. But it's very common. And it's not, it has to do with cholesterol, it has to do with your lifestyle, but it's not normal. When AFib can lead into VFib, which that's where people die. So it's not super serious at the beginning, but it can be cause stroke, heart attacks. But that's very common in the United States. So we, like you said, the cardiovascular health begins with self-awareness. Where am I? What's my resting heart rate? And if I see somebody that has a higher resting heart rate, generally, eventually, they might be a candidate for some of these things, such as stroke and AFib and things like that. Heart rate variability, most people don't know that unless they're using some type of wearable. But these things all start to show up.
So when we think, okay, what are we going to do? So when someone thinks, well, cardiovascular disease is on the rise, I I think a lot of people roll their eyes or say, well, it's not going to hit me, or it's going to happen. It's just inevitable. It's genetics. It's part of the aging process. You said something really, it's very common, but it's not normal. I think that's where we have to step back and say, okay, the average life expectancy is 77 years old or 80 years old. But most people are going to live into their 90s. And the key is, how are we going to have that cardiovascular health, that lung function, that mobility, to have that capacity? Let's talk about cardio modalities. Okay, what are we going to do? Okay, I think we've hit the science on the head.
Yeah, we're good there. Oh, and
Okay,
again,
so now
podcast. Yeah, what are we going to do?
what are
So
we going to
really,
do,
yes,
and what's the lifestyle?
yeah. So yesterday really hit me. So we took your son, my grandson Paula, and our grandson Ez to Mackinac Island yesterday. So if you've never been to Mackinac Island, it's very busy this time of year. We took the ferry across, whatever. But really hit me yesterday. I didn't say this to your mom, or I didn't say this to Az, but we get there and we get the bikes, and it's 8 miles around the island. It's just spectacular. It's beautiful water, beautiful everything. But we stop at the arch, which is about a quarter of the way around, and you climb all these stairs to get to the top, and it's way up, and it's spectacular. But it really hit me that Az and I are taking 2 steps at a time all the way up, no stopping. We were passing everybody, and I kept thinking to myself, these people are not shocked, because these are steep stairs, of how unfit they are cardiovascular, because everybody stops, and they stop multiple times on the way up. And then as we turned our bikes in, we went over to the fudge shop to get some fudge for you guys and some taffy. Again, 89-day challenge, that ain't going to happen for now. So I had my last taffy and fudge yesterday. But everybody, the line is 9 miles long for the horse carriages, not for the bikes, for the horse carriages. So the whole island is waiting in line for these horses. So back to beginning, what are you doing every day?
Maybe they're like horses. Maybe they're like
Yeah.
horses.
They like the carriage because they don't have to move. And then we rode the old ferry going back, and it's super slow, but very tipsy. 99% of the people did not get out of their seats for 45 minutes on that boat, because they couldn't handle that balance and that. So it really hit me yesterday. Wow, this is our society. They have very little balance, strength, cardiovascular fitness. We need to start being more intentional about moving your body, getting out of breath, finding activities you enjoy, start slowly, build it up, because before we know it, it starts to disappear. And now we get into all these cardiovascular health problems, which you just mentioned, 61%. So that's where I really begin with my clients. Okay, let's pick some activities you like to do that gets you a little bit out of breath, a little bit uncomfortable, not super painful. Let's start with the walking. Maybe it's a mini trampoline, some slight calisthenics. That's where I start all my clients. Biking.
All right, let's talk about that. So mini tramp, maybe it's a treadmill or an art trainer or an AMT or elliptical, bike, run, swim. I had somebody move an exercise piece and we were talking about the step mills that there used to be. There's so many different ways to do it. Is there one way that can help people really maintain or improve? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I have everybody initially, if they can walk, to start to walk and not walking 30, 40,000 steps a day, just walking and be intentional about that. So step one is we're going to start participating in activities, not talking about duration. We're just talking about it. I'm a huge fan of the mini trampoline because it works in your balance, your lymphatic system, your heart. It's easy. It's safe because it has a bar on it. We're a huge fan of jump sport. You can buy these online, but I'm a huge fan of that. And the other thing I'm really a fan of, and I teach all my clients, this is some form of easy calisthenics. I did it this morning, and it's a great thing. You don't need any equipment. You can make it super easy, but it really teaches people ways to move. They can put on music. So that's really, I don't do a lot of cardiovascular pieces of equipment anymore. We went swimming yesterday. We're going to water ski today.
For someone that doesn't use calisthenics in their everyday vocabulary, give someone just maybe the layman's terms of what do you mean by calisthenics?
Well, I really like this thing to start out with is just high knees. So you just take your knees and you pick them up. And it could be if you're not very fit, but as you pick them up, then you can do fast little movements and higher knees, but it's not really impactful. Then I do this thing called soft touch. And basically you're stepping side to side. These are really simple things to do. You could do a jumping jack where you're not actually jumping if you didn't want to. And then you could do skater where you're actually stepping from side to side or jumping from side to side. So we have many of these on our videos that people can look at, but these are things that I do at least 2 times a week on top of the mini trampoline almost daily. So I
So
think calisthenics is really easy to do.
what are some mistakes you could fall into when you're starting to find couple different modalities from a cardio standpoint?
Well, I think people do too much. I always have them do less. Less is best. So really just
Less time?
less time. Let's do less time. Let's perfect the movement. Let's get the movement down first. And then we can start adding the volume or the time. And I think
Do you
people
think
always they do the time first. I'm like, wait a minute. You don't need to be doing walking 30,000 steps with terrible gaits. Now we have a knee issue or an ankle issue. And now I don't want to do that anymore. So let's
so?
really get it down first.
When you were training people and really focus on their body alignment and posture specifically for strength training, one of the things that I learned early on, just probably from watching, is people's posture, body alignment, cardio tends to be even more important, but usually not talked about. So if you watch a typical, we've seen bad training. We'll just call it what it is. You watch a typical trainer that's maybe having someone doing a cardiovascular modality. There's not a lot of emphasis on posture and alignment. It's more about the pace or the time or the duration. Why is that, and what's happening there for most people?
So the first thing what we're gonna do is let's just find some activities you enjoy, or what are we gonna do that? And then we're gonna work on posture and alignment. But one of the greatest indicators of intensity, if you're falling apart or redlining, is that people's posture starts falling apart. And so why would I want to put somebody in a step mill or some type of machine where they're draped over it and they're in flexion, their back's out of alignment, their knees are out of alignment? Why? So to me, let's really create this overall conditioning without injuring the body and get back into balance. So that's the first thing I always teach. Show me how to do this movement with great technique. And then let's see if you can maintain that technique for the next little bit here. And that's the goal. It's no different than if I'm doing a bicep curl and I can't scapular retract and I'm not engaging my legs and whatever. I'm just flinging up the weight. That's not what we're teaching. So first thing we do is we teach the movement, get them doing the movement. Then we try to perfect the movement. And again, part of intensity is heart rate, the talk test. Can they talk while they're, but then a big one is visual. What do they look like when they're doing it? I mean, I
Yeah.
can walk through the gym and I can see people right now like, why are you doing that? Your form's horrible. You would never drive the car down the road with the wheels out of alignment. So it's the
So I was thinking
same thing.
I was thinking about our 3 R's in strength training, and I think it applies to cardiovascular um, training in some different ways: rate, range, and resistance. So the rate, so sometimes people are going too hard, but I think what ends up happening, especially with rate, is they're doing it too long. So one of the things is a 30-minute timer on a cardiovascular piece of equipment. I think people are, if they do choose to do cardio, they tend to focus on doing it too long with not a high enough intensity with in incorrect form. So rate's the same thing that applies to cardio. Range, when I was thinking about range, when I see people's capacity for cardiovascular fitness, their range of motion also gets uh, decreases. So think about running versus jogging versus walking versus shuffling. That range of motion in your extremities is decreasing. So I see people on a cardio machine sometimes, let's just say it's a elliptical or a stairmaster, where they try to keep the amount of time and the calories burned, but they decrease their range of motion in that movement. So on a elliptical, maybe you don't have the incline as high, so your feet are moving less, but they're moving as fast. Or maybe it's a stairmaster where you're draped over, like you said, and you're barely moving your feet. You're just waiting for those stairs to move. I think that's a really powerful point. I'll get into my personal experience. And then resistance. With cardio, there's different ways to create resistance, whether it's an incline or maybe you're adjusting the equipment, or whether it's swimming or biking. You talked about the mini trampoline, maybe you're putting a weighted vest on. I think those same things can apply, and it also gives us the opportunity to change it up, because it leads into another important point, which is planes of motion. We tend to just go forward at the same grade, the same level, and yet we can walk backwards. Most people very rarely walk backwards. You talked about side to side, rotation. These all lead to keeping that capacity for the cardiovascular, I would say, fitness or movement patterns better. What do you think about those 3 R's when it comes to cardio?
Well, again, I think you're right on. The big thing is how do we get people to start? So again, just get started. Don't get crazy with it. I think there's lots of things. Find activities you like. If you like to dance, whatever you like to do, cross country ski, snow ski, but any way to get the heart rate up is a good thing. And you want to do that pretty regularly. And I like doing stairs every so often. We have these steep stairs down to the lake. Ez and I are going to do some of these later today. It doesn't have to be rocket science. You climb those stairs one at a time or two at a time. You go up, you go down, you walk around a little bit. That's the key is, and then from there, then you can start working on a little bit more intensity, but really gets back to looking at the intensity. How are you measuring? Is it just measuring your heart rate? Is it measuring your posture, your ability to talk? Because when you can't talk, you're moving into anaerobic training, which is a good thing. So that's always if I can talk the whole time, people on a bike or doing whatever, they're not having much of a training effect. So you got to get a little uncomfortable. And sometimes just walking, going for a hike is just a great thing. But over time, you want to mix this up. And I'm really a big fan of that's why I like the calisthenics, because you're working on multiple planes of movement. You're working your feet more, your ankles more, and these things that allow you to move better. And that's one of the reasons I train for them, because I want to play paddle and pickleball and be able to move better. And that's where the calisthenics and multiple planes come in.
Well, I think for me personally, one of the things that was you only your experience is probably the best way to learn it. On paper, I know it, I've studied it, I've taught it. But when you lose a little bit of flexibility and mobility, I find that if it starts to impact the way that you're trying to move, the things that you like to do, it's also going to impact your cardiovascular fitness because your training effect and your training capacity is going to shrink. So in my case, I I cannot push myself the same way via a run unless that I have that range of motion in my legs and in my body. So they go hand in hand, and we know a lot of runners that very rarely strength train, stretch, work on mobility, and you see that their capacity in the running or their modality will eventually decrease. And so connecting those dots, I think, is really important because I think we sometimes take them and put them in two different buckets. Why do I need to work on my strength, flexibility, balance when all I care about is cardio? Well, at some point, injury will come in. Or why do I care about cardio when all I want to do is have strength? Well, because then you're going to have greater lung function and capacity to do all those other movements. So to me, it hit me like very seldom do you hear people talk about flexibility, mobility, ankle, knees, hips when it comes to cardiovascular fitness. But it,
Well, and
you know,
again, back to
if you have your knee operated on, you're probably going to lose cardiovascular fitness. And so we got to connect those dots.
well, I think you saw Djokovic playing Alcaraz in the finals of Wimbledon, and he just had his knee surgery, I don't know, 6 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, whatever it might be. It was amazing to me. He could still, and now he lost in straight sets, but amazing to me that how this guy could actually perform at this high level. And it's all about strength. The Olympics are here. You want to watch technique and form and body alignment and everything else. There's no better athletes in the world, and every one of them is doing some form of strength training, mobility training, because balance is strength, strength is balance. So I have some of my clients right now that are big runners, but they do running, walking. I go, like, yeah, well, when you're running, really focus on your form, work on your breath, work on everything. And then when you walk, versus just, you see a lot of people just going out running or jogging, which they really shouldn't be. They should be doing faster walks with better alignment, better posture. And then maybe they can jog for a little bit and then go back to the walking. So I really like that, really focusing on your posture, your technique, and that will lead into greater capacity is what you're leading to. And that's what I think this is the whole podcast is about. I mean, as people think about this, as you mentioned, 61% are going to have cardiovascular issues. And I deal with a lot of clients that have cardiovascular health issues. They don't realize they can get better. And then a lot of these things we're talking about is you now they can get better, but you can prevent some of these things that happen in the first place. And a big part of that is keeping your cardiovascular health as we age.
One of the things that has helped me tremendously is trying to create a little bit better balance in the body. So I like to run from a cardio standpoint, but I like to do the stairs and I like to do the arc trainer. And I one of my favorite ways, and it's not always possible, and I don't always think about it, is the arm ergometer. It really is a great way to try to get into that anaerobic phase because we're not used to using our arms, especially lymphatic system. And I love the mini trampoline. But you know, I've dabbled with running backwards and doing side shuffles and karaoke in different planes, but a really intentional focus on moving backwards and trying to create that synergy in the body. Another thing is really working on that ankle mobility. So when I do just average walk around the house, at work, my gait is a little bit slow, lot of heel striking because you're just walking. But what ends up happening is I find that my ankles they lose mobility. And when my ankles lose mobility, then when I go out for a run, or if I really try to perform at a run, now my ankle's in a position that it not isn't in enough. And so creating that mobility or keeping that mobility has been really tremendous. And you don't know it until you lose it. So I was not aware, I think you would agree, I wasn't aware that I had such limited ankle mobility because I could adapt in other ways until you can't adapt anymore. So tell us about ankle mobility, different ways to move the body to keep us able to keep that cardio going.
Well, again, one of the handful of years ago, I went in to see Walt Reynolds, which I believe is one of the top trainers in the country. And Walt was Olympic caliber high jumper. And I went in to see him, and yeah, I was training with him on a regular basis, probably training with him once or twice a month. And people were asking me, why do you need a trainer? I'm like, because I need a trainer. So one of the first things he said to me, I ruptured my patella tendon. I got 3 screws in my knee. And he says, where's your limiting factor? And we were doing a couple different things. And I said, well, it's my knee. I got the 3 screws. And you've heard this story before. And he says, well, I don't really truly believe it's your knee. It's your ankle mobility. You don't have very good. And he was exactly right. So we started doing these things, and we can send this link out after this podcast. But we started doing some of these range of motion things for your feet and your ankles. And again, as we age, we lose mobility, flexibility, especially in our extremities, our hands and our fingers. And I have a little bit of that in my left hand now. So these are things I work on. But for everybody out there, you want to work on these ankle, feet mobility things, especially if you were going to want to do any type of movement and continue to do the movement, because that's what we start losing very quickly is the ankle mobility, feet flexibility. In fact, I trained this morning doing some calisthenics downstairs, but I did them in bare feet. And I do that most often when I'm by myself training. Lower body is working on my bare feet because I want that stimulation with my feet and my ankles.
Yeah, for me, again, having the calf and hamstring and different things that I'm trying to uncover, and the cause and effect is important. And I think when you look at a lot of people, let's just say, have knee issues. Well, it could be ankle issues that lead to the knee issue or back issues that lead to the knee issues. It's very rarely the joint that is causing us the most issue or the muscle. So in my case, if my calf continues to feel like it's tight or limited, there's many things that could be happening. Obviously, acutely, I can get my calf massaged, cupping. But what you find is if my ankle is not able to move because of the limited range of motion, then you adapt. And so then those muscles are working differently. And that's what I've really discovered, that I took for granted, not having injuries, never breaking a bone in my body, knock on wood. But we all have limiting factors. So I think that's an important part of the discovery. As you're thinking about cardio, remember that strength training helps with it. Flexibility helps with it. Self-awareness of where we're going, because I think our mission for everyone listening is, can you challenge yourself to a peak challenge, whether it's the Manitou or Pierce Stocking Sand Dune, or the Manitou Incline in Colorado Springs, or mountain skiing, or water skiing, or doing a bike race, or climbing a hill. I think we need to stretch ourselves more, because that allows us to keep that capacity. And we think our capacity can stay high for a long time, but you have to have that self-awareness.
Well, one of the couple things you just mentioned there, hold on a second. So I really like the idea, like, as we age, that's why I really like the mini trampoline for everybody, because it creates this environment that's very safe, but they can start really seeing their mobility, their balance. Can they hop on one leg? Can they jog? And what happens over time, people start getting rid of these activities. I try to bring them back in. Oh, that's exciting. Well, yeah, let's just work on some of these things, because if I'm going to go hiking, I want to maintain balance. I want to have that strength. If I want to go snow skiing, I want to have all that kind of stuff. So I think that's one of the things we're looking at cardio, is finding activities that really can stretch you, that are very safe. And then maybe I start working on some calisthenics. When I worked with Jill Marlin as a physical therapist, she brought more of these calisthenic spinning type movements, jumping movements that simulate me stopping and starting in more of a paddleball games and activities. And it really has helped. So I think, don't feel like you can't improve this stuff, everybody. You can. And if you do it correctly, and now we have a greater capacity to do all the stuff you love to do, including climbing these stairs yesterday with my grandson, which I felt I was trying to keep up with him. And And I think that's what we're looking for. We want to maintain some of these things you can do as long as you can do them. We're all going to eventually slow down, but let's keep doing the stuff we love to do.
One last question. How quickly can I improve my cardiovascular fitness? Let's just say I try to do the arch stairs, and I got to stop every couple of minutes. How fast do you think someone can improve those?
Oh, you can improve it in 14 days. I always tell people all the time, it's amazing how the human body, if you have they were talking about Nick Saban and the new coach for Alabama, it's all about the process. If you create a process that you're actually getting out of breath a couple of times a week, everything starts getting better. Your lungs get better, your stroke volume gets better, your capacity increases. So I've seen major transformations. I had a gentleman years ago, he had a resting heart rate of 74, and within a year, he got his resting heart rate under 60. And his capacity just went crazy. Obviously lost some weight and got healthier, but these are really exciting times that I think you get this, I get this, that when people start seeing self-improvement, they're growing, they get excited about that. Today, I had one of my breakthroughs at my golf lesson, which I'll share with you later, but it's always, hey, I'm struggling with this or that, but all of a sudden you get a little bit better, and that makes you feel, and that's what I asked my instructor today, Joe. I said, hey, Joe, how does this make you feel? And he goes, it's always cool to see my students get better. So that's what we get excited about, is people have the capacity, the human body's ability to heal and self-corrects. And I've never been more excited about that than we are today. So lots of improvement can happen, and it can happen very quickly.
All right. So I got one simple takeaway, one challenge for everybody. Send us your breaths per minute. And what that's going to do is give you accountability to do it, to check that box. But more importantly, you'll have that self-awareness.
With that, so I like that. So let's make sure you're doing breaths per minute, but also resting heart rate. It'd be really nice to share what those two, because they will go hand in hand. So breaths per minute and your resting heart rate before you get out of bed.
So breaths per minute, the easy way to do that is count your breaths. Maybe you have a stopwatch for 60 seconds, or you do it for 10 seconds and multiply it by 6. And again, one breath is an inhale and exhale. You're not trying to hold it, whatever comes naturally. And then the same thing for heart rate. You're taking your pulse. You can do it for all 60 seconds, or you can multiply it after 10. For the breaths, I really like to do the whole 60 seconds because of the variability. But send it to us, have the accountability, but more importantly, then you'll have the self-awareness of where you're at. And again, remember, this stuff's all connected. As simple as we can say it is, if you start to breathe more, or if you start to lose your cardiac output, your stroke volume, because your heart rate is increasing, next thing you're going to have more of the nervous system activated, and more stress response, and more different stress hormones, and it all goes hand in hand. That's why movement is powerful, not only physically, but also mentally. And our mental aspect leads to our physical aspect. But cardio is important. 61% of US adults by 2050 will have some type of cardiovascular disease. But here's the thing. It's common, but it's not normal. Meaning we have the ability to feel our best. We have the power to feel our best, but we have to make that activity, put in the work. So we'll see you again next time. We'll spend some time next time talking about our 89-day training plan, and have a great week. We'll see you again next time.